Tariffs are retarded. Hey everyone, me Kevin here. Sorry to be blunt, but the reality and fact is that no matter what you do with tariffs, you create economic deadweight loss that cannot be cured. You will hurt the economy with any imposition of tariffs. And in this video, I'm going to show evidence for exactly what has happened in the past, why tariffs are fundamentally flawed and they should not be used, but I'm also going to provide a reason as to why tariffs are used. Because we like to regularly hear that quote, especially the one that's parroted by people on social media. Well, if tariffs don't work, why do other countries use them? Well, in this video, you'll finally discover the real reason why tariffs are used, and let's just be clear, they are not used for economic purposes. In fact, it's so widely understood that tariffs don't work that when you look at research pieces, you typically find introductory lines that read just like this. It is widely believed that tariffs invite retaliation and that the post-retaliation equilibrium leaves all countries worse off than they would be at free trade. We present patterns that are consistent with this belief. These are trade war documents that have been written for decades. Trade wars don't work. Nobody wins in a trade war. Now, Donald Trump likes to tell us that, oh, but, the trade war helped our American farmers. Well, the USDA, which is literally an agency that you are in charge of, and the Economic Research Division tells us that no, actually, when we had a trade war with China, our exports of American-made food to China fell in half. We had a 20% import rate of U.S. product to China in 2017, and that was depressed to just 10%. So in other words, a 50% decline by 2019. And guess who picked up the slack? It was Brazil and other countries in South America mostly. So in other words, the previous trade war that Donald Trump pitches as having helped our farmers didn't help our farmers, it actually substantially hurt our farmers. Now, then, because we did so much damage to our farmers, the US government actually provided a bailout to farmers because there was so much damage, and Donald Trump pitches that as actually a wild success, when the reality is our American farmers were net worse off post the 2018 trade war, and it's likely that today's trade war is going to do just the same thing. Now, in this video, I'm going to explain why tariffs are a complete failure, and again, you're also going to see why tariffs are used, and again, they're not used for why you think they might be used. First, I'd like to refer to the estimated impacts of proposed tariffs by the National Retail Foundation. They represent American retailers. They want more American products bought, okay? This would be a good thing if we have more consumption in America. They benefit from the economy growing, not from the economy shrinking. So what do we find here? Well, first we find various different scenarios for proposals from Trump. Scenario A would be a universal 10% tariff or even 20% tariff on all imports into the United States. And then an additional 60% or even 100% on China. So they break this into sort of your A-B scenario. And when you look at scenario A, you can find that scenario A shows tariffs significantly higher than where they were before the imposition of Donald Trump's tariffs. We could see tariffs on apparel, footwear, furniture, household appliances, toys, and travel goods about 3 to 5 times lower than where they were post Donald Trump's 10% tariffs. Mind you, this document is from November 2014 or 2024, basically pricing in what would happen if Donald Trump actually did something as crazy as a 10% universal tariff. And ironically, that's where we sit today. So what the National Retail Foundation found is that if you just look at the 6 categories that they analyze, apparel, toys, furniture, household appliances, footwear, and travel goods, in every single scenario, consumer prices rise between 6 to 31, as much as 55% of increases in consumer prices. And in every single scenario, consumers lose billions of dollars of spending power. In fact, it's estimated that just these 6 categories alone could increase or create a drag on GDP, increase the loss of consumer spending by $46 to $78 billion, increasing the non-multiplied drag on GDP by about 1/3% per year. That's significant, especially since our Q1 growth would be negative if we lost 0.3% of GDP. So tariffs exacerbate this because not only would these 6 categories hurt 0.3% of GDP, but you also have to figure a multiplier effect of anywhere between 2x to 4x. Because when you go buy shoes from Nike that are manufactured, in China, when you go spend $100 on a pair of shoes from Nike, only about $25 of that is going to China. The rest is going to the advertisers in America, the retail store in America, the person who delivered the shoes to the store, the person who unboxed it from the shipping containers in America. Americans get the bulk of that $100 of revenue. Most of that money stays in America, even though the shoes are manufactured in China. Anyway, with that said, when that employee doesn't get paid a salary because they get laid off or, their hourly wage, they don't have money to pay their rent. They can't pay their rent. Their landlord can't renovate a property. Landlord can't renovate a property. All of a sudden you've got drywallers and painters who are out of work, and then they can't pay their rent. That's how recessions start. Everybody has to compress their spending because of tariffs. Tariffs are an economically vile tool to achieve your goals, and there are way better ways of accomplishing this. So, not only do we have the velocity of money, the ripple effects of expansion, employment, and otherwise, they also add a substantial amount of uncertainty, which is a very difficult factor to estimate. The CBO estimates that the real damage to GDP from a 10% universal tariff would be about 0.6%. That's 0.3 because of the China 60% and 0.3 because of the 10% universally. That's every single year that you have that GDP damage, which just isn't smart. You're hurting the economy and you're not quite able to offset that. Now, we do have alternatives to tariffs, but first, I'd like to answer, why do we use tariffs in the first place then? Like, why would we ever use tariffs if they're so economically dumb? Well, I make this very, very simple outline right here. Economically, tariffs are dumb. However, they are a political tool that costs actual money. So that's my distillation. But take a look at this. I'll read it in a little bit more of a complicated manner. In this paper, we shall model the lobbying activities of labor used intensively in the import competing industry as a game between labor and the government, where the actions of the government are determined jointly by its willingness to grant tariffs in the face of political pressure and by its desire to maximize social welfare. In other words, politicians want to A, make you feel good, and B, are begged by unions in exchange for votes to please provide protectionist measures. So in other words, tariffs or protectionism are solely a political tool. They are designed to make people who support one political party feel like they are getting something good. And feeling good is very common. In fact, let me read this research out to you. In fact, I'll even show it to you right here. Okay? Notably, a recent poll found that while 62% of Americans are sympathetic to a tariff on imported blue jeans meant to boost production and employment in the domestic blue jeans industry, that support evaporates if tariffs make the jeans $10 to $25 more expensive, which our analysis suggests would be the case. So in other words, tariffs are great until you start having to pay the price. As soon as you start having to pay the price, you hate tariffs. Now, of course, today, we're May 9th, people are like, oh, but where are the empty shelves CNN is talking about? Who cares? The Communist News Network isn't going to tell you the reality that most businesses are sitting on 1 to 3, maybe 4 months of additional inventory. You're not actually going to see the impact of tariffs until June, probably July, maybe July through September and October before Christmas season. Hopefully the tariffs are gone by then, and I remain convinced that we will be back to free trade either under the Trump administration or within the first 6 months of the next administration, which is exactly why I think it's nonsensical to think that companies are actually going to expand their manufacturing in the United States, because they'll just get left holding a bag when we go back to free trade and they spend all this money on infrastructure in the United States only to go back to free trade and find it's much cheaper to manufacture in Mexico or otherwise. See, another argument that people provide against tariffs is they argue, oh, but Kevin, why should we be supporting people in India who are working for $2 an hour? That's slave labor. No, actually, if we didn't support those industries in other countries where people are working for $2 an hour, they would end up taking jobs working for 50 cents an hour. So the lesser of two evils, it's actually not evil, the lesser harm is actually promoting capitalism and more good. So not being capitalistic would be evil. Being capitalistic and spreading our production amongst the globe to raise the standard of living for everyone around the entire world, just like Warren Buffett says, also benefits us in America. We just move more into the service industry rather than the manufacturing industry. We work more in customer service and sales and retail or hospitality than we do in manufacturing because we're a more advanced economy with greater per capita wealth, per head wealth, right? This is a good thing. So capitalism helps us, but it also helps the areas where we spread capitalism. So this idea that, slave labor, imagine what their situation would be like in poorer countries if they had no work. Be even worse. So anyway, it's somewhat ironic that as soon as prices go up, people start hating tariffs. Well, that'll come. In fact, here are some of the estimates for what we could see for tariffs on an individual basis, and then I will explain what tariffs look like. Our analysis found that the price of apparel would rise significantly, 12.5 to 20.6%. Consumers would cut back on spending by 22 to 33%. So in other words, consumers would cut back by more than the increase in price. In addition to that, lower income households would be hurt more, and consumers would pay $20 for every single dollar that U.S. producers earn. Now, the U.S. government would take a little slice of that, not all of it, because there's deadweight loss. But basically, consumers are paying $20 to donate $1 to American manufacturing. That's illogical. That's stupid. Now, is there a way we can graphically understand this? Yes. This is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to provide it in as simple of a process as I can. If you don't want to hear this graphical explanation of why tariffs always fail, you can fast forward probably about 2 minutes. That'll be about what it takes. And if you want 2 minutes and you want to spend that with me here on this, great. Left side price, right side quantity. Okay, how does this work? It's very simple. When a market is at equilibrium, so basically the middle of this meeting of supply and demand, what do you have? You have a free market. It's very simple. People demand more quantity when the price is lower. So see right here, demand is way up on the quantity side over here when the price is low. That's logical, right? Price is low, people want more of it, right? As the price goes up, guess what happens to the demand curve? Well, you start moving left on the demand curve. You demand less. That makes sense. So far, very logical, right? Price goes up, demand goes down. Very simple. That's why the demand curve is downward sloping. And that's also why the supply curve is upward sloping, because as price goes up, suppliers want to provide more goods. All right, very simple. So what do tariffs do? Well, to see what tariffs do, let's pick a price. So we'll pick a price at the blue line over here, okay? So at the blue line, prices are relatively low, so we demand a high level of that good at that low price. But suppliers are not willing to supply as much, so you actually have a shortage right here. This is when prices are too low and you have a shortage because suppliers don't want to produce that much good, that many of those goods at a low price. So they just don't. And then you have a shortage. This is why when, you have things like rent control, you end up with a shortage of homes because suppliers are not willing to supply as much as you need. Very simple. Simple economic 101 principles. Rent controls are little band-aids that make people feel better who are currently in their homes. They are politically popular, they are economically dumb, and they actually make housing more unaffordable. Every economist knows that. Anyway, then what do we have? We impose a tariff. So with a tariff, we're actually increasing the price. So we're going to go from the blue line to the green line. Now, what's the problem of going up from the blue line to the green line? When you go from the blue line to the green line, you've raised the price. So what happens with demand? Well, demand goes from the right red circle to the left red circle. In other words, we demand less of that product by the purple squiggly line right there. That's just how much less of it we're going to demand. Now, producers get the benefit domestically of some producer surplus on the left side over here, which is great, but not all of it, because we have another deadweight loss category over here because you're not actually selling your product for that green line. You're selling your product for where the blue line intersects, and consumers are paying where the green line intersects on the right. And what's in between is an economic inefficiency. Now, part of that is captured by government revenues. That would be this green box right here in the middle, government revenues. So you get domestic producer surplus and then government revenues in the middle. However, that purple section is the section that is lost. It is always lost in every single economic scenario where you chart tariffs. You will always have a deadweight loss here and here. So the net total effect is negative by this entire segment plus the benefit of government revenue and producer surplus, which means you have this overarching negative that is always greater than the benefits. So no matter what you do, from a logical, economical, factual point of view, no matter what you do, tariffs will always create a dead weight loss. They will always hurt. And that's why when you go through this Retail Foundation document, what you'll actually find, oh, mind you, here's just another chart of our trade weighted average tariffs, right? You know, before the Trump tariff imposition, our tariffs were really only around 1.5%. And as were they with most other countries, because they're economically stupid, but politically you want to show some tariffs to your base to get your votes, right? That's the only reason they exist. But anyway, as you go through this Retail Foundation piece, you'll find in every scenario, consumers will pay more than we actually benefit. See, in the case of toys, consumers pay $24 for every additional dollar earned by US toy producers. Now again, the government is going to pick up some of that difference, but not all of it. You will always have a loss. So consumers are paying $24 for every $1 earned by producers in the US. That is a stupid trade-off. Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. Lower income households spend more than 3 times as much of their after-tax money on toys as do higher income households. And a $50 tricycle is expected to cost $68 to $78. A $25 board game will cost $34 to $39. A $17 plush toy will cost $23 to $27. And American families will bear the cost of tariffs. Price increases are expected at 36 to 56%, especially since in 2023, China accounted for 77% of total toy imports, about 25 times greater than the total value of toy imports from the next largest foreign source of supply, Mexico. In other words, tariffs, dumb. Tariffs, very dumb. Furniture prices expected to rise $6 to $10. Cribs, couches, everything more expensive. Consumers would pay $3 for every extra dollar of US producers. So actually not as bad over there, but still inefficient. For appliances are expected to go up 19 to 31%, and consumers will pay $30 for every additional dollar earned by US household appliance producers. The gains to US producers and the Treasury from tariff revenue do not outweigh losses to consumers. Overall, the economy suffers a net loss of $4 to $7 billion just from the appliance sector. Footwear, same thing. You're paying $32 for every $1 of local producer revenue. Travel goods, you're paying $13 for every $1 of local producer revenue. Conclusion, tariffs are paid first by the American importer, not foreign countries or foreign suppliers. Very few American importers can absorb the significantly higher costs out of their profits. As products make their way to retail shelves, the tariff costs transfer and materialize in the form of higher prices to American consumers. Now, in the event that American businesses say we can't pass on these prices because we don't have pricing power, then they have to take it in the margin, which leads to layoffs, which leads to recession. So when people ask me, they say this all the time. They're like, Kevin, well, what is the good of tariffs? I answer, there is no good. There is no good of tariffs. Again, unless you were using them as a temporary tool to get to free trade, there is no inherent good to tariffs, and somebody is going to have to pay for the damage that's caused every single day tariffs exist. And that cost will be greater than the benefit. So every day you have tariffs, you are paying more than you are getting. It's a very simple, factual, economically founded, grounded understanding. There's no debating it. There is no benefit to a tariff. There are better ways to do this, and I wrote down a few. So my take is that some things you could do instead would be incentivizing local production, such as when we incentivize in a solar inverter manufacturing in America, we bring jobs to America. And guess what? We don't piss off our alliances. We don't piss off Canadian or European tourists who don't want to come to America anymore. We don't piss off other countries. We don't make our enemies become friends with our friends, China cozying up to the UK and European Union countries. This is a disaster. We are destroying our global credibility with an economically idiotic move. This does not make sense. So again, I reiterate, people are like, Kevin, where was this passion against Biden? If you were watching, you would have seen it, because I just hate politicians and I rag on all of them, okay? I've realized, I'm not on anybody's team. In fact, my goal is just to educate. And if I piss off everybody who watches me, fine. But I'm still gonna provide the facts, data, evidence, and logic. And usually what I find is people who actually have an IQ over that of a rock appreciate this perspective and recognize, damn, yeah, no wonder Kevin doesn't like tariffs and he's so aggressive against tariffs. There is no economic literature that says they're good. They're used for political purposes and that's it, but they come at a massive economic cost. And as somebody who prides themselves on a rich understanding of economics, tariffs are bad. Full stop.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.